The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Felix Brennan and Sophie Chen cordially invite you to celebrate their engagement. I stood in my mailbox alcove for what felt like hours, staring at those words until they blurred. Felix. My Felix. Except he wasn't mine anymore, hadn't been for 8 months. 8 months since I'd convinced myself I needed something different, something more exciting than what we had. The story begins 2 years earlier, though really it starts long before that. I was 27 when I met Felix at my best friend's birthday dinner. He arrived late, apologizing profusely, his hair slightly damp from rushing through the rain. He slid into the empty seat beside me, and when he smiled, genuinely smiled, not that practiced expression most men wore when meeting someone new, I felt something shift in my chest. "Sorry, I'm Felix," he said, extending his hand. "I work with the birthday girl, and apparently punctuality isn't my strong suit." "Kaylin," I replied. "And apparently honesty is yours." He laughed at that, warm and unguarded. We spent the rest of dinner talking while everyone else's conversations swirled around us. He told me about growing up in Vermont, about his obsession with old vinyl records, about how he'd moved to Richmond for work, but still hadn't quite figured out the city's personality. I told him about my advertising work, my complicated relationship with my hometown 2 hours south, and my collection of half-finished novels that cluttered my nightstand. "You sound like someone who's searching for something," he observed as dessert arrived. "Aren't we all?" I countered. "Maybe, but most people won't admit it." That first conversation lasted until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs around us. Felix walked me to my car, hands shoved in his pockets against the November chill. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Like properly, not just as someone's coworker and someone's friend?" I said yes before I'd even fully processed the question. Our relationship unfolded with surprising ease. Felix had this way of making ordinary moments feel significant. Grocery shopping became an adventure in finding the worst product names. Rainy Sundays turned into vinyl listening sessions where we'd lie on his apartment floor and debate whether the bass line made the song. He remembered small things, that I hated cilantro, that I got anxious before client presentations, that my mother's birthday was April 19th, even though I'd only mentioned it once. After 6 months, I gave up my studio and moved into his 2-bedroom place in the Fan District. It felt natural, inevitable even. We fell into rhythms that surprised me with their comfort. Felix made coffee every morning while I showered. I cooked dinner most nights while he did the dishes after. We argued occasionally, about politics, about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom, about whether The Godfather Part Roman II was actually better than the original. But even our disagreements felt manageable, like something we could work through together. "I love this," Felix said one evening as we painted the second bedroom a soft gray. We decided to turn it into a shared workspace, his desk by the window, mine along the opposite wall. "Building something together, you know, making this space ours." I kissed him, paint-speckled and happy. "Me too." But then something started shifting, subtle at first. My friend Vanessa got engaged to someone she'd been dating for only 4 months. At the engagement party, everyone kept asking me and Felix when we'd be next. "Oh, we're not in any rush," Felix would say comfortably, putting his arm around me, but I noticed he didn't say never. He said not in any rush, which implied eventually, which implied a future I hadn't fully considered. My younger sister Bridget started dating someone new every few weeks, each relationship a whirlwind of expensive dinners and weekend trips. When she visited Richmond, she'd scroll through her phone showing me pictures. Rooftop bars in DC, beach houses in the Outer Banks, concerts at venues I'd never heard of. "Your life seems so settled," she commented once, not unkindly but with a hint of pity. "Same routine, same apartment, same guy." "Stable," I corrected. "Not settled. Is there a difference?" I couldn't stop thinking about that question. Was there a difference between stability and stagnation, between contentment and complacency? Felix and I had been together 18 months, living together for a year. We had inside jokes and shared Netflix accounts and knew each other's coffee orders by heart. We were happy, weren't we? My creative director position at the agency was demanding but unfulfilling. I'd pitch innovative campaigns only to have them watered down by clients who wanted safe and traditional. Felix would listen to my frustrations, offer suggestions, remind me that I was talented and that the right opportunity would come along. "You're so supportive," I told him one night after a particularly brutal client meeting. "That's what partners do," he said simply. Partners. The word sat heavy in my mind. When had we become partners? When had this relationship graduated from exciting new thing to serious commitment with implied longevity? And why did that realization make my chest feel tight? I started noticing other couples everywhere. The ones in restaurants who ate in silence, scrolling their phones between bites. The pairs at the farmer's market who seemed to be going through the motions of weekend activities without any real joy. The married friends who talked about their spouses with resignation rather than affection. "Is this all there is?" I asked Vanessa over lunch. "What do you mean? Being with someone, building a life together, does it always become routine?" She studied me carefully. "Are you unhappy?" "No, that's the thing. I'm not unhappy. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if there's something else out there. Something more exciting. Felix is a good guy, Kel. I know he is. That's not the problem. But what was the problem? Felix came home that evening with flowers, not for any occasion, just because he'd seen them and thought of me. He asked about my day, actually listened to my answer, made his famous carbonara for dinner. We watched a documentary about music producers and debated the ethics of sampling. He fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, peaceful and trusting. I stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to shake the feeling that I was missing something important by staying comfortable. My parents' relationship wasn't helping. They'd been married 34 years, and every holiday visit felt like watching two people fulfill contractual obligations rather than sharing a life. They had separate hobbies, separate friends, separate bedrooms because of Dad's snoring. They were polite to each other, functional even, but there was no spark, no evident joy in each other's company. "Is this what happens?" I asked my mother during a visit home. "You start out in love and end up just coexisting?" She'd looked startled. "Marriage is about partnership, Kaylin. About building something stable. But are you happy?" "Happy," she said the word like it was in a foreign language. "I have a good life. Your father provides well. We have our routines." Routines. There was that word again, and suddenly it felt like a death sentence. Bridget was visiting Richmond again, this time with her newest boyfriend, some hedge fund analyst from New York who wore expensive watches and talked constantly about his apartment in Chelsea. They radiated chaotic energy, finishing each other's sentences and touching constantly like they couldn't stand to be apart. "How long have you two been together?" Felix asked politely over dinner. 3 weeks, Bridget said happily. "But when you know, right?" Felix squeezed my hand under the table. "Right." But later, after they'd left, Bridget pulled me aside. "No offense, but you and Felix seem more like roommates than partners. Where's the passion?" "We have passion," I defended, though even I heard how weak it sounded. "Really? When's the last time you did something spontaneous, something that made your heart race?" I couldn't remember. Our life was planned, predictable, comfortable, settled. The thoughts became intrusive, constant. I'd be at work and wonder what it would feel like to flirt with someone new, to experience that electric first date uncertainty. I'd be cooking dinner and imagine what my life might look like if I'd taken that job offer in Atlanta, if I'd prioritized my career over relationship stability. I'd be lying beside Felix at night and wonder if this was really what I wanted at 29, or if I was just following a script someone else had written. "You seem distant lately," Felix observed one morning. "Is everything okay?" "Just work stress," I lied, but it wasn't work stress. It was life stress, identity stress, the crushing weight of wondering if I'd chosen comfort over possibility. My friend group wasn't helping. Vanessa was deep in wedding planning and seemed stressed rather than happy. Another friend, Margaret, was going through a messy divorce after 8 years of marriage. "We grew apart," she explained over wine. "We became different people than who we were when we got together. Neither of us was brave enough to admit we'd outgrown the relationship." "How do you know if you're growing apart or just going through a phase?" I asked. "You don't really. That's the terrifying part. Felix suggested a weekend trip to Charlottesville, wine tasting, nice dinners, time away from our routines. It should have been romantic. Instead, I found myself feeling suffocated by his thoughtfulness, resentful of how much he was trying when I couldn't articulate what was wrong. "This is nice," he said as we walked through a vineyard, his arm around my waist. "Yeah," I agreed, but the word felt hollow. That night, in the bed and breakfast he'd carefully researched and booked, Felix made love to me with such tenderness that I wanted to scream. Why couldn't I appreciate this? Why couldn't his love be enough? "I love you," he whispered afterward. "I love you too," I replied automatically and hated myself for how mechanical it sounded. The weekend away didn't fix whatever was breaking inside me. Instead, it seemed to magnify everything I'd been feeling. Felix had planned every detail: reservations at restaurants he knew I'd love, a surprise stop at a bookstore specializing in first editions, even a morning hike to catch the sunrise because I'd once mentioned wanting to see one from the Blue Ridge Mountains. His thoughtfulness should have melted my heart. Instead, each gesture felt like evidence of how much I was failing him by not being able to match his certainty about us. On the drive home, he reached across the console to hold my hand, something he'd done hundreds of times before. But this time, I felt the weight of obligation in that touch rather than comfort. He was trying so hard to reach me, and I was retreating further with each passing mile. The silence in the car felt different than our usual comfortable quiet. It was loaded with things unsaid, questions unasked, doubts unvoiced. "That was a great weekend," he said as we pulled into our apartment complex. "It was," I agreed, and watched something flicker across his face, recognition, maybe, that my words didn't match my tone. He didn't press, though. That was Felix's way. He gave me space to work through things, trusted that I'd come to him when I was ready to talk. What he didn't know was that I didn't know how to talk about feelings I couldn't even name, restlessness that had no rational source. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing and feeling like the worst person in the world. Here was someone who loved me completely, who just spent an entire weekend trying to reconnect with me, who deserved so much better than someone who couldn't appreciate what they had. The guilt was suffocating, but not suffocating enough to stop the thoughts that kept circling. What if there's something more? What if I'm settling? What if I never know who I could be on my own? The conversation happened 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Wednesday evening. Felix was making dinner while I sat at our kitchen table pretending to read emails. "I've been thinking," he said, not turning from the stove. "Maybe we should talk about the future, really talk about it." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've been together almost 2 years, living together over a year. I love you. I love our life together. I'd like to know if you see this going somewhere long-term." "Long-term," I repeated numbly. "Marriage, probably. Kids eventually, if that's something you want. I'm not saying tomorrow, but I'd like to know we're on the same page." The kitchen felt too small, the walls too close. "That's a lot to think about." He finally turned to face me, concern creasing his forehead. "Kel, we've talked about the future before. This shouldn't be a surprise." "I know, it's just what if I'm not ready?" "Then we wait. I'm not trying to pressure you." "What if I'm never ready?" The question came out before I could stop it. Felix went very still. "What are you saying?" "I don't know, I keep thinking about all the things I haven't done yet, all the experiences I might be missing by settling down so young." "Settling down?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Is that how you see this, as settling?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" I couldn't explain it, couldn't articulate the restlessness that had been growing for months. "I think I need some time to figure things out." "Figure what out?" "Who I am, what I want. I've never been on my own, Felix. I went from my parents' house to college to living with you. Maybe I need to know who I am when I'm not part of a couple." His face went through several expressions: confusion, hurt, anger, resignation. "You want to break up?" "I want some space to think." "Those are the same thing, Kaylin." He turned off the stove, the dinner forgotten. "You don't ask for space in a relationship unless you're already halfway out the door." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" "You're telling me you need to figure out who you are without me. That sounds pretty definitive." Tears were streaming down my face, though I wasn't sure when they'd started. "I'm not saying forever. I'm just saying I need time." Time to do what? Date other people, see what else is out there. Maybe, I don't know, is that so wrong? To want to know what else exists before committing to something permanent, Felix laughed, bitter and broken. Wow, okay, I thought what we had was pretty great, but apparently I was the only one who felt that way. That's not true, what we have is great. It's just not great enough. He grabbed his keys from the counter. I'm going to stay at Ryan's tonight. You can figure out what you want without me here making you feel suffocated. Felix. I love you, Kaylin. I have since about our third date. I would have built a whole life with you, but I can't be with someone who sees me as something to escape from. He left. I stayed in that kitchen until the food he'd been cooking went cold, then moved to the couch where I cried until I had nothing left. He came back the next day to pack. We had the practical conversation about the apartment. I'd move out since his name was on the lease. We divided our possessions with heartbreaking civility. He didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask him to wait. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, he said when I loaded the last box into my car. Felix, I mean it. I hope exploring your options gives you whatever it is I couldn't. I moved back home temporarily, back to my childhood bedroom with its outdated wallpaper and shelves full of high school trophies. My mother was sympathetic but confused. Felix seemed like such a good match, she said. Are you sure about this? I need to be sure about me first, I replied, echoing the phrases I'd read in self-help articles about finding yourself. The first month was exhilarating. I had complete control over my schedule, my space, my decisions. I went out with friends whenever I wanted. I flirted with men at bars and on dating apps. I took a pottery class. I drove to the beach alone and stayed in a hotel room that was entirely mine. You seem lighter, Bridget observed. Like you can finally breathe. I agreed, convinced I'd made the right choice. Felix posted occasionally on social media, pictures of vinyl records, baseball games with friends, and I convinced myself I felt nothing seeing them. By month 2, I'd moved into a small apartment closer to work. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, took up the entire closet, ate cereal for dinner without judgment. I went on dates with several different men, a lawyer who talked only about himself, a musician who was charming but unreliable, a teacher who seemed nice but lacked any real spark. None of them were Felix. I told myself that was the point. Month 3 brought my first real moment of doubt. I'd had a terrible day at work. A campaign I'd worked on for weeks fell apart due to budget cuts. I came home to my empty apartment and reached for my phone to call Felix before remembering I couldn't anymore. There was no one to vent to, no one who knew exactly the right thing to say, no one who'd have dinner waiting because they somehow sensed I'd had a rough day. I pushed the feeling away. This was what independence looked like. I needed to be comfortable being alone, but the doubts kept creeping in. The men I dated were fine, interesting even, but conversations felt shallow compared to what I'd had with Felix. The freedom I'd craved started feeling like loneliness. The spontaneity I'd wanted started feeling like lack of purpose. How's the single life? Vanessa asked during her bachelorette party. Great, I said automatically, but even I could hear the lie. Month 5, I started checking Felix's social media obsessively. He looked happy in the photos, genuinely happy, not performatively so. There was a woman who appeared in several pictures at what looked like the same group gatherings. She was pretty, laughing at something off camera, comfortable in a way that suggested she belonged there. I told myself I was just curious, that I was happy he'd moved on, that this was what I wanted. I didn't believe any of it. Month 6, the panic attack started. I'd be fine one moment and then suddenly unable to breathe, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd given up. The dating that had seemed exciting now felt exhausting and pointless. The independence I'd craved felt like isolation. The self-discovery I'd pursued felt like self-indulgence. I'd thrown away 2 years with someone who loved me unconditionally for what? A handful of mediocre dates, the theoretical possibility of something better. The pride of saying I'd been on my own. I think I made a mistake, I told Vanessa over coffee. What kind of mistake? Felix, us, all of it. She looked uncomfortable. Kel, you were so sure. You said you felt trapped. I was confused. I was listening to all the wrong voices telling me I needed to explore before settling down. But what if what I had was already exactly what I needed? Then maybe you can fix it. But could I? It had been 6 months. He'd moved on, or seemed to be moving on. What right did I have to disrupt his life because I'd finally realized what I'd lost? Month 7, I drove past our old apartment building. Felix's car was there, and beside it was an unfamiliar vehicle with a local university parking permit. I sat in my car for an hour, arguing with myself about going upstairs. I didn't. What would I say? Sorry I destroyed something beautiful because I was too immature to recognize its value. Month 8, the invitation arrived. I must have read it 20 times, memorizing every word, every elegant curve of the script. Felix was getting married. Not just dating, not just serious, engaged. Ready to commit his life to someone he'd known less time than he'd known me. The woman from the photos, I discovered through strategic social media investigation that I'm not proud of, was named Sophie. She worked at the university. She liked hiking and cooking and old movies. She seemed kind and smart and exactly the type of person Felix deserved. She seemed like everything I'd been but hadn't appreciated. I'm writing this now, 2 days before the wedding I'm not attending, in the apartment I rent alone, surrounded by the independence I fought so hard to achieve. The panic attacks haven't stopped. The regret hasn't diminished. The crushing weight of knowing I destroyed the best relationship I've ever had hasn't gotten any lighter. I'm 29 years old, working a job I'm ambivalent about, living in a space that's never quite felt like home. I date occasionally, but can't connect with anyone because I'm too busy comparing them to someone I threw away. My family's encouragement to explore my options seems hollow now that they see the consequences. The friends who supported my decision to leave have their own lives and relationships to focus on. I can't even hate Sophie. From everything I've seen, she seems lovely. She seems like someone who recognized what she had and appreciated it. She seems like the person I should have been. Sometimes I imagine alternate timelines. The one where I said yes when Felix wanted to talk about the future, where I worked through my restlessness instead of running from it, where I recognized that comfort and stability weren't prisons but gifts, where I'm the one wearing an engagement ring and planning a wedding and building the life I was too foolish to value. But I'm not in that timeline. I'm in this one, where my choices led me exactly here, alone in an apartment that's too quiet, holding an invitation to the wedding of the man I loved to someone who was smart enough not to walk away. People talk about closure, about learning from mistakes, about how everything happens for a reason. But some mistakes don't teach you anything except how to live with regret. Some doors, once closed, don't reopen no matter how hard you knock. Felix found his person. She just wasn't me. Not because we weren't compatible, not because we didn't love each other, but because I was too busy looking for something better to recognize that better was already there. The hardest part is knowing this is entirely my fault. Felix didn't change. He didn't stop loving me or treat me poorly or give me any legitimate reason to leave. I left because I was scared of commitment, influenced by people who didn't have my best interests at heart, convinced that the grass must be greener somewhere else. It wasn't. It isn't. And now I'm standing in brown grass of my own making, watching someone else enjoy the garden I abandoned. I'm 29, single, and living with the consequences of valuing possibility over reality. By the time I'm ready to commit, if I ever am, all the good ones like Felix will be married to women like Sophie. Women who were mature enough to recognize a good thing when they had it. I had everything. A man who loved me, a relationship that worked, a future that was ours to build. I threw it all away because I thought I needed to find myself first. Turns out, I found myself exactly where I started, alone, confused, and full of regrets that no amount of independence can erase. The only difference is that now I know exactly what I lost, and that knowledge doesn't set me free. It just makes the loss more unbearable. Felix is getting married in 2 days, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that could have been us if only I'd been brave enough to choose love instead of fear.